Can I just check in? Are you all familiar with the health at every size approach and the non-diet approach? You can give me a little thumbs up or, yeah, cool, great. Actually, and I just realized, guys, silly me, I might just go ahead and pop us on the speaker view as well. That'll be great for the filming. Cool. All right. Well, thank you for sharing that, Leanne. So what we might do is I just want to dive in just a little bit deeper into like what's expected in a session with you. So Susan asked about what does a session with a dietitian look like, and is there a sort of protocol that you follow, and then some individualized treatment in that. So yes, I guess a bit of both. But can you guide us into like what would you expect? Like you come in, would you obviously have a chat of some kind with the client and dive into their sort of medical history and food history, relationship with food kind of stuff. And then is there anything where you outsource or get information from, get test results from for any blood work or that kind of thing? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so usually in the first session, we get to know each other. It's a chance for us to see whether it's a good fit, so whether your goals fit in with the way that I practice. Mm-hmm. And I would always try and get permission from you if you would like me to communicate with other providers. So if you've got a GP or a psychologist or someone that you think is relevant for me to be communicating with, I would find that out. Mm-hmm. If you have blood tests that you'd like me to see, I would look at that as well. And then we really have a look at your history, and particularly around food rules. So did your family have rules for you growing up? Were you ever placed on a diet? Do you have rules for yourself? And, how do you feel about it when you break those rules? Mm-hmm. What happens when you break the rules? All those sort of things is what we'd go through. The first session is really about getting to know each other and working out, is there any trauma in a person's background? And because that's a big part of how food then presents itself in someone's life.
Beautiful. Okay, great. Thank you. And how do you find that sessions, or how many sessions do clients normally need? I'm assuming it's a little bit different for different people and different needs, but do you find that people will often have that initial session and then like a couple more at weekly intervals or at monthly or fortnightly intervals? How does it usually work?
Yeah, it's really individualistic. So some people might come and they really just want to drill down on some specific points about intuitive eating, and then they're confident to go on, and that's all they needed. Mm-hmm. Other people might have food intolerance that they really want to look at. So in that case, it would be a few months that we might work through that. Mm-hmm. Whereas others, I might see them for a year or more. And generally at the beginning, I'd see people every 2 weeks or every month if that's what they felt more comfortable with. Yep. And then as things go along, it's really individual again as to how often people feel that they'd like to check in.
Yeah, cool. So let's dive into the question that was just raised earlier too about intuitive eating. And like I mentioned just before some of you arrived, the question was raised, how do we distinguish with intuitive eating? How do we distinguish if we're eating intuitively or if it's emotional eating? And I find that this question does come up a lot with people who are exploring intuitive eating. And just to give you a quick sort of background on what I've done. So I've explored intuitive eating for my own personal journey. So I've been in and out of disordered eating for many years, and then I found the health at every size approach and the non-diet approach, and then I really threw myself into that. And I worked with a coach. I worked with a coach more around it was around the food, behavior, and relationship, but really a lot of body image work that went with that as well. And then of course I accompanied that with reading the intuitive eating book myself and diving into lots of resources around that. And I did a couple of professional courses around body positive counseling and binge eating disorder and stuff. And then I've gone through and worked through the workbook, which accompanies the book. So for those that are less familiar with intuitive eating, it's a book written by 2 dietitians based on their experience working with clients over decades. and it's got a 12-step, I don't like, actually not a 12-step, it's got a 10 sort of principles that you explore, and there's an accompanying workbook that goes with that, and that helps you to really dive deeper, and it's the kind of questions that you might even work through with a dietitian, that a little bit deeper. But I've worked through that, and I've also worked through it with members at the studio as a kind of open, sort of almost like a study group, where we've had this opportunity to really chat through and just go through the workbook together at the same time, and have this lovely community to come together and chat about it every fortnight. And we're currently on the second round of that. So we've got a group running at the moment. So that's going to be my experience. So I would love to hear a little bit more about Leanne's thoughts on this. I certainly have, like I said, experience. A lot of people do find themselves in that kind of grey area and just not sure what's going around. So Leanne, do you want to share with us a little bit about how you can kind of differentiate between what's going on? Is it intuitive eating? Is it emotional eating? How do you know?
Yeah, and that's such a big question. But I guess the first thing I want to say is that emotional eating is really stigmatized in our culture, and it shouldn't be. So sometimes people might be just doing the best that they can, and that eating serves a purpose. And often it's come from an entire lifetime of using food to cope. And that I just want to say that it's okay to sometimes use food to cope with feelings, if that's the safest way to do that. The other thing we would always look at is making sure that you're nourished. So food restriction, physically or mentally, can trigger loss of control eating, and that can feel like emotional eating. So for someone who's not eating enough during the day, getting to that point in the evening when you're actually experiencing, biological hunger, and then that fast eating, that feeling like you can't stop, can be as a result of not eating enough during the day, or not eating enough during the week, because our food sort of isn't just day to day, it's kind of balanced over
a really good
days.
point.
And hormonally as well, for people who are menstruating, the lead up to the period can be a time when people need more energy as well, which is often ignored in our culture.
I think just to touch on that point, I think that's what we find with traditional diets and diet culture, and that is often it's like this set amount to eat every day, as though your body just needs that perfect same amount every day, which is just it's not accurate. It's not helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other side of that is psychological restriction, where you might be getting enough food in, but you're actually telling yourself, I shouldn't be eating this. You're feeling guilty. And the idea of being deprived in the future is enough to trigger a bit of loss of control eating as well, because a lot of people have this idea that, well, tomorrow I'll go on my diet, or tomorrow I'm going to try to be good again, and then I better finish this packet of biscuits or whatever it is, and that can lead to eating more than you wanted to, or more than feels comfortable.
And that's thought of as I know it comes up in the intuitive eating workbook, as the last supper mentality, where you're really just trying to make the most of it, the last hurrah before you go and eat clean again. That makes sense. So would you have any particular points to help somebody recognize in the moment what's going on for them?
It can be really hard in the moment to notice that, but I think it would be more looking at the patterns and looking at over the day, how much have you eaten, and on days when you've eaten more, have you felt that same intense need to eat? What else is going on? Is there stress? Sometimes it can be helpful to keep a diary if it's not triggering for you, or to work with the hunger and fullness scale. But it really depends on the person. Again, for some people, any sort of writing down or numbers can be really triggering, because it feels like a diet.
Yeah, for sure. And that can just slide back into that thought patterns, that mentality. I've certainly found that a really big helpful point, like around nourishing yourself, because if you have had a history with disordered eating, and you've had a lot of rules around food, and that could be rules around food groups, cutting out food groups, or food at certain times, or portion sizes. So you have all whatever rules, and then what I learned was that often I wasn't nourishing myself. I wasn't really giving myself just enough, like kind of just basic like calorie dense foods. So I might have felt like I was eating enough because I was eating things that might, in my diet mind, I deemed is okay, but they weren't actually giving me the sustenance that I needed. And so it was, I was kind of depriving. So often that would lead to that drive, that desire for, high sort of caloric dense foods, which can feel like emotional eating, or it feels like a binge. So when I learned how to just, there's a great quote that I love from one of my favorite coaches, Summer Innanen, and she says, eat like a grown-ass woman. And I always keep that in my mind. It's like, just eat the damn food, eat a big breakfast, eat a big lunch, eat a big dinner, eat some snacks, eat the food, because it was always like this, controlled and portions and worrying about things and stressing about the wrong combination of things and the wrong time, the wrong amounts. And that was something I learned, just eat the damn food. And then I still follow that kind of guideline now, because then I know the times when I don't do that, physically my body just feels like it needs something. It just needs some sustenance. What I find helpful, so I think Gizem, you raised this question, what I find helpful in the moment is to slow down and check in, like, what's going on externally and what's going on internally. So what's going on externally, and this is something I picked up from Nina actually, what's going on in your external world that might be throwing your emotions a little out of whack and driving you towards perhaps wanting some comfort. And if food is something that you find as, one of your top soothing tools, and you might always be going towards that. And then so recognizing if you do have this external stress, you've got something going on in your relationship, in your life, and your work, we're living in the times of COVID, and then checking how you're feeling internally, and checking how you're feeling physically. So trying to check, is there physical hunger? What have I been eating, like Leanne said? And then what is happening externally? Like, do I have any other drives, emotional drives, that I need self-soothing? And that can help you sort of maybe identify this is emotional hunger or it is physical hunger. And I really want to reiterate what Leanne said too about we do demonize emotional eating. And I've certainly learned that it's something that's, I find, a great coping mechanism, and it's part of, a wider toolbox of coping tools now. It's not the one sole thing that I do, and it doesn't lead me into this crazy behavior, because I have a much more peaceful relationship with food now, the work that I've done around it. So I think when it is part of your coping toolbox, and you've got other things to support you, then food can be quick, readily available. It can do, really soothe you. And for me now, I find that it does the trick, and usually, I can enjoy the food and get on with life, and it doesn't sort of send me in that spiral. Anything else to add there, Leanne?
Yeah, I just wanted to note that, like you said, looking for those high carbohydrate foods. So that's really a biological drive. So when we're not eating enough carbohydrates, when we're not getting enough energy into our day, the body actually triggers a cascade of hormones that's going to send you out looking for that food. And so nobody says I've got loss of control eating with kale, because your body is really looking for what's going to get the energy in as quickly as possible. And there's all sorts of hormones that get released that affect not just you physically, it also affects your thoughts. So thoughts around food and obsession with food is really normal if you're not getting enough food in. And it can feel like there's something wrong with you as a person, but it's really pure. It's a common human experience, and it's very, very normal.
That's great to hear, and that reiterates what I was talking about with nourishment too. When I did start to just eat the goddamn food, eat like a grown-ass woman, I really did notice that big difference. Like it's not on your brain so much, it is that biological drive. On that note of emotional eating, I think, and it being so demonized in society, that was something that I learned from the coach that I worked with, Isabel Fox and Duke, and that was one thing she really drummed in. And I think, of course, like, it can be very fearful too, to be like, oh, I'm just letting go and allowing myself to eat emotionally, and it's okay. And, freaking out about the often the quality of foods that we go to for emotional comfort are those more high caloric dense foods and higher sugar foods and that, because they give us pleasure, but again, if you can offer yourself and work towards building that more peaceful relationship with food overall, then what I've certainly found in my experience is that it just sort of balances out, so it doesn't feel like you're sometimes you'll eat more and then sometimes you'll eat less, and it just sort of, your body sort of figures it out and balances it out, so it doesn't feel like that fearful thing that you need to be scared of choosing emotional eating as your comfort. It's something that, like now I can do it and I enjoy it, and then I get on with life, and then it doesn't feel like something that happens like all the time, and it happens when it does, it's good, and it's fine. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and it's also really important to remember that coping strategy is there for a reason, and if you just take that away, then how are you then going to cope without that?
That is
and
such
so
a
really
good point.
Yeah, so we have to be really careful when we're talking about getting in touch with inner sensations and our bodies, that every emotion has a physical sensation as well, and for someone who's experienced trauma, it might be really confronting to be getting it back in touch with their body. And so we just have to really take things slowly and work out what's going to be best for you and your journey. Make sure that there's other practitioners involved if necessary.
Yeah, it's nice to have that sort of support crew around, right? Yeah. So Leanne, I know that you have a special interest in working with parents and helping raise intuitive eaters. So I'd love to know, I know that not everyone's a mum here, but I think it's still really helpful to know, like, what are your tips around raising intuitive eaters? Because in this day and age, we are consuming a lot of messages from society about food rules, and there's certainly like a bit of a hierarchy of foods, and there's a lot of fear around processed foods and that kind of thing, and I guess kids in the school playground and stuff. So do you have any tips for raising kids to be intuitive with their food?
Yeah, sure. One person I was talking to this week put it very succinctly and said, just don't be weird about food. And that's kind of the crux of it. But it's really about respecting children's capacity to regulate themselves. So all of us are born with really in touch with our hunger and fullness signals. And for many people my age and older, we were taught to ignore those signals. So a lot of children are taught either to ignore their fullness by finishing their plate, or the double whammy of finish your dinner and then you can have your dessert. So you're not only eating past fullness on food you don't want, you're then eating the dessert when you're already full, which then makes it easier as we get older to repeat those behaviors and eat past fullness as adults as well. And then the other side of that is children's hunger being ignored and saying, well, you've had enough and you need to stop when they're still hungry. And so making sure that we are providing enough food and a wide variety as well. So when children aren't exposed to sweets in the home, often what we'll find is that they then will go to a party and fill up their pockets, or will sneak food. So parents who are particularly concerned about children's body size and weight often find that their children will then engage in what we call opportunistic eating. So when they have the opportunity, they'll be eating those foods. Whereas for children who are raised as intuitive eaters and given a wide variety of food regularly, they might just have a bit of this and a bit of that, leave half of it on their plate. So really just making sure that kids get enough of everything first and foremost, but then not restricting sweets, because that often backfires.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I think a lot of people, again, this is something that's come up a lot in the intuitive eating sort of space, chatting with clients and things, are really familiar with eat everything on your plate. And I think that definitely as an 80s, well, I grew up in the 80s, 70s baby, grew up in the 80s, there was definitely that, that was what we were taught. So I think a lot of people probably resonate with that. That makes total sense. So like, giving the children, the kids, the ability to learn and respond to their own body signals instead of it being the external rules. And that's really ultimately what intuitive eating is about. For those that are a little bit new to it, it's about recognizing that your body has a lot of signals. And well, this is my way to describe it, and Leanne, you might be able to share something as well, but I think of intuitive eating as a tool to connect you with your body and learn your body signals, and not just your signals. It's not just hunger and fullness. It's not just learning to respond to recognize your hunger signals and respond and recognize when you're full and stop eating. It's more about this sort of flexibility, this flexible approach to also factor in, like learn about what your likes and dislikes are and what your lifestyle allows you, and sort of having this flexibility to adapt what you need day to day. In that kind of like marrying what your body is telling you with the situation and your lifestyle and everything, to build this more, peaceful relationship with food, like Leanne said before, not be weird with food.
Yeah.
Leanne, would you, how would you describe intuitive eating, or anything else to share there?
Yeah, it's really about a self-care framework around food. And so it's getting back in connection with your body. It's about embodiment. A lot of us walk around all day in our heads trying to ignore what our body is saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's rebuilding that trust between you and your body. Your body learns to trust that you will feed it,
Mm-hmm.
and you learn to trust that the signals that it's sending you are valid. Both of which are quite often eroded in our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a set of rules. So it's not only eat when you're hungry and stop when you're full. It's recognize when you're hungry, recognize when you're full, and then make an informed choice based on those.
Yeah.
Enjoy eating past fullness if you're having a special meal, or recognize if you've missed a meal because you were in a meeting, and then you can allow your body to make up for it later. So it's just really being in touch and responding to that where you can, and just being gentle with yourself and acknowledging when you can't.
What a beautiful description. I love that. Thanks, Leanne.
If you have a question and you want to email me, then Anna can pass on my email as well.
Yeah. And yeah, Leanne's details are on our website as well under the practitioner page. And you can see Leanne through telehealth. You're doing telehealth, right, Leanne?
Yeah.
Online. Yeah. Cool. And hopefully one day back in the studio. So.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was a lovely chat, really informative, always helpful. I always love hearing and chatting to other non-diet professionals and that, because you just kind of reiterate the message, and it just feels like Gizem was saying, validating. It's always nice to sort of hear that. So I hope you enjoyed it, team.